When nothing happens, most people quit. Boredom is where discipline is usually exposed. Not in pain. Not in chaos. In the long stretch where nothing changes and no one is watching. The room feels flat. The air sits heavy in the lungs. The clock moves without urgency. This is where most routines quietly end. People say they lost motivation. What they really lost was tolerance for stillness. They expected training to reward them with sensation. When it didn't, their hands loosened. The body cooled. The ritual dissolved without a sound. A man shows up to train. The floor is the same as yesterday. His movements feel dull. Muscles warm slowly. No progress announces itself. Someone nearby glances over, then looks away. Nothing impressive is happening. He continues anyway, because stopping would require a reason, and he no longer searches for one. Ancient warriors understood this stretch. Not the dramatic moments, but the empty ones. The days where repetition offers no emotion. Where the practice does not speak back. They did not call this a problem. They called it the gate. Boredom strips intention down to identity. When the mind finds no stimulation, it starts negotiating. The body feels the weight of the question before it is spoken. Leave, or remain. Become someone who needs interest, or someone who endures without it. This is not where effort is tested. This is where a person is named. If this tension feels familiar, stay. Do not rush ahead. The quiet is doing its work, the long middle where progress disappears. The second week feels heavier than the first. The body moves through the same motions, but without novelty. Hands grip the same tools. Feet land in the same places. Breath settles into a predictable rhythm. There is no resistance to fight, no excitement to ride. Just repetition, exposed and unadorned. This is where boredom sharpens its blade. Not as an emotion, but as pressure. The shoulders tighten slightly. The jaw sets. The mind looks for variation the way a thirsty mouth looks for water. It scans the room. It counts minutes. It invents reasons. Someone nearby checks a phone, laughs softly, and leaves early. The exit becomes visible. Most people mistake this phase for stagnation. They feel nothing changing, so they assume nothing is happening. But beneath the flat surface, something is being stripped away. The body continues while the mind complains. The sequence stays intact even as interest drains out of it. This is not growth. This is erosion. A man keeps training at the same hour. The lights hum. Sweat comes slower now. Muscles know the pattern too well to protest. There is no sense of accomplishment when he finishes. No relief either. Just the quiet fact that he stayed. When he walks past others, they don't comment. His consistency has become unremarkable, and that unsettles him more than praise ever did. Boredom exposes the dependency on reward. When progress isn't visible, the mind demands compensation. When none arrives, it starts bargaining. Shorten the session. Change the routine. Skip today and return stronger tomorrow. Each suggestion sounds reasonable. Each one requires a choice. And choice is the crack boredom waits for. Ancient discipline removed this middle by refusing to name it. Monks sat through the same hours, staring at walls that offered no feedback. Warriors repeated forms long after mastery dulled their edge. The practice was not adjusted to keep interest alive. Interest was allowed to die. As boredom lingers, something else steps forward. The body begins to move without checking for engagement. The ritual holds even when attention drifts. Training becomes quieter. Less dramatic. More stable. This is the point where many leave, not because it is hard, but because it asks them to remain without stimulation. What stays after boredom passes is not enthusiasm. It is continuity. And continuity does not negotiate when the mind starts making small deals. The body arrives before conviction does. Shoes are tied. The room is entered. Muscles begin their familiar work. Then the mind wakes up and notices how empty it feels. No resistance. No challenge. Just the same sequence, again. The pulse is steady. The air feels stale. This is where the bargaining begins. It starts quietly. A suggestion, not a command. Shorten today. Save energy. Nothing is lost by leaving early. The shoulders loosen as if already agreeing. The hands hesitate on the next movement. Somewhere nearby, another person packs up with relief, stretching the stiffness out of their back, already halfway gone. These negotiations are rarely dramatic. They wear the tone of reason. The mind frames boredom as efficiency. Why waste time repeating what you already know? Improvement has slowed. The signal is gone. The body feels warm enough. This is framed as wisdom, not weakness. A disciplined figure does not argue back. He does not silence the voice. He ignores it by continuing the motion. Knees bend the same way. Breath stays even. The sequence advances without consulting interest. Each repetition denies the mind a vote. Not forcefully. Casually. As if the question was never heard. This is where most systems fail. They rely on daily consent. They assume the mind will approve each session. Boredom exposes this flaw. The moment approval is required, the practice becomes fragile. Choice enters. And with choice, exit becomes an option. Ancient training removed the option before boredom could exploit it. Fixed hours. Fixed actions. The body learned the schedule before the mind could interfere. When boredom arrived, it found no handle. The ritual continued without ceremony. The belt was tied. The floor was cold. Knees folded down anyway. Social friction appears here. Others notice the lack of adjustment. No music change. No new variation. Someone comments on how rigid it looks. Another laughs, suggesting a break would help. The disciplined one nods without explanation. Explaining would imply doubt. As the mind runs out of leverage, something shifts. The body stops waiting for permission. Movements continue even as attention drifts. Boredom loses its teeth when it realizes it cannot stop the action. The negotiation ends not with a decision, but with irrelevance. What remains is not intensity. It is inevitability. And inevitability does not require interest to survive, repetition that no longer asks permission. By the fourth repetition, the body stops reporting. Muscles move without commentary. Breath falls into a shallow, workable rhythm. There is no surge of effort, no resistance to overcome. The sensation is thin, almost absent. This is where boredom usually claims victory, because nothing feels earned. The room sounds louder now. A cough somewhere behind. Fabric shifting as someone adjusts their stance. Another person glances over, pauses, then looks away with mild confusion. Nothing about this looks demanding. That is the problem. The practice offers no proof of seriousness, no visible strain to justify staying. The disciplined figure continues. Hands wrap the handle the same way. Feet align without correction. The sequence advances on time, not on feeling. The mind drifts, then returns, then drifts again. It does not matter. The body does not wait for clarity. This is repetition after meaning has drained out of it. No intention. No enthusiasm. Just continuity. Each movement lands because the previous one did. Cause replaces choice. Training becomes a chain rather than an event. Most people never experience this layer. They change routines before reaching it. They add variation to escape the quiet accusation boredom makes. But variation keeps identity shallow. It keeps practice dependent on stimulation. The moment stimulation fades, the habit collapses. Here, repetition does something quieter. It dulls the voice that asks why. The question still appears, but it no longer carries urgency. The body has already moved on. Knees bend. Shoulders settle. The next motion is already happening before the thought finishes forming. Social pressure thickens here. Others comment on how mechanical it looks. Too rigid. Too automatic. Someone suggests adding intensity, or rest, or novelty. The suggestion hangs in the air, waiting for agreement. Silence answers it. Silence, followed by the next repetition. Ancient training valued this stage more than progress. When practice no longer requires intention, it becomes durable. When boredom can sit on it without causing collapse, discipline stops being a performance. It becomes a background fact, like breathing or gravity. The body begins to recognize this state. There is less tension in the shoulders. Less checking. Movements feel smaller, cleaner. Not sharper. More honest. Training is no longer trying to prove anything. This is where stability forms. Not through effort, but through the removal of choice. When repetition no longer asks permission, boredom loses its leverage. And without leverage, it has nothing left to threaten, continuity that survives flat days. There is a point where training feels neither heavy nor light. The body is warm enough to move, not sharp enough to impress. The floor presses up through the soles. The breath stays level. Nothing resists. Nothing encourages. This is the texture of a flat day. On these days, boredom does not announce itself. It settles in quietly, like dust. Movements continue, but without charge. The arms lift. The stance holds. Sweat appears out of habit, not effort. Someone nearby finishes early and stretches with visible relief, glancing once more before leaving. The absence of struggle makes staying look unnecessary. Continuity answers without words. The sequence does not shorten. The pace does not change. Training proceeds at the same length, the same order, the same hour. The body recognizes the pattern and follows it. Not because it wants to, but because stopping would feel like interruption rather than rest. Most people think consistency requires energy. Flat days expose the lie. Energy is unreliable. Mood is unstable. Interest fades quickly. Continuity survives because it does not depend on any of these. It exists as an arrangement, not a feeling. A disciplined figure notices how little attention the body now needs. Hands move while the mind wanders. Breath settles even when thoughts scatter. The practice continues beneath awareness. This is not focus. This is momentum built through repetition. Social friction sharpens here. Others ask why there is no adjustment on slow days. Why not reduce volume? Why not skip when it feels pointless? The questions carry concern, but also discomfort. Predictability unsettles people who rely on mood to justify action. The disciplined one listens without defending. Defending would mean reconsidering. Flat days reveal the structure underneath discipline. Without intensity, without reward, the only thing holding the practice together is identity. The body returns because returning is normal. Absence would feel strange. Skipping would require explanation, and explanation would break the chain. Ancient systems protected continuity at all costs. When illness came, practice shrank but did not disappear. When fatigue arrived, intensity dropped, not presence. The chain was never broken. Gaps were considered more dangerous than weakness. As the session ends, there is no satisfaction. No sense of having earned rest. The body cools gradually. Breathing steadies. Others have already forgotten the session happened. That is fine. Continuity does not need witnesses. Flat days pass quietly. What they leave behind is subtle but decisive. The practice no longer feels optional. It feels installed. And once installed, boredom becomes irrelevant, when routine becomes social friction. By now, The routine has settled into the body. Arrival time no longer varies. The same door is opened. The same space is taken. The air feels familiar on the skin, neither welcoming nor hostile. Training begins before anyone acknowledges it has started. This quiet predictability is where tension shifts outward. Others start to notice the absence of flexibility. Invitations are phrased differently. If you're free replaces assumption. Jokes appear about being too rigid, too serious, too locked in. The tone is light, but the message is clear. Your stability creates contrast, and contrast makes people uneasy. The body feels this before the mind names it. A slight tightening in the chest when someone laughs. Heat behind the eyes when a comment lands. The hands continue their work. Grip remains steady. Breath stays even. The routine does not pause to process opinion. Boredom has already been defeated internally. Now it returns wearing a social mask. Not excitement, not fatigue, but pressure to adjust for comfort. Skip once. Change the time. Loosen the rule. The suggestion is framed as balance. The cost is never stated. A disciplined figure does not argue. Arguing would pull the practice back into the realm of choice. Instead, the body continues its pattern. Knees fold. Spine aligns. Movement flows in the same order. The room can interpret this however it wants. This is where identity hardens. Not through stubbornness, but through repetition surviving scrutiny. The routine has been seen enough times that it no longer needs explanation. It exists regardless of approval. The body feels lighter when this realization lands. Not energized. Relieved. Ancient warriors expected this stage. Stability that survives boredom often unsettles others. It exposes how much daily action is negotiated. How often routines bend to mood, company, or convenience. Your consistency becomes a mirror people didn't ask to look into. The practice continues, unremarkable and intact. Sweat dries on the skin. Muscles cool. Someone nearby packs up later than usual, slower this time. No comment is made. Influence does not announce itself. It seeps in through exposure. As sessions repeat, social noise fades. Not because it stops, but because it loses relevance. The body no longer reacts. Training has moved beneath reputation. It is not a statement. It is a fact. Boredom no longer threatens from inside. Social pressure no longer distracts from outside. What remains is a routine that holds its shape under both. This is stability earned quietly, without witnesses, without reward. And once this point is reached, the question is no longer whether you will continue, but what would feel stranger, showing up as usual, or explaining why you didn't, the moment boredom loses authority. The session begins the same way it always does. The body knows the sequence before thought arrives. Hands move. Feet settle. Breath adjusts without instruction. Boredom still appears, but it arrives late now, like a guest who missed the opening. There is a dullness in the muscles. A familiar heaviness behind the eyes. The air feels unchanged. Nothing invites effort. Nothing repels it either. This used to be the point where the mind held power. Where it could delay, shorten, or redirect. Today, it watches instead. The body continues without consulting interest. Movements land because they are next, not because they feel useful. Sweat forms lightly. The pulse steadies. The rhythm holds. Boredom speaks, but its voice carries no leverage. It can describe the emptiness, but it cannot stop the motion. Someone nearby slows down, visibly restless. They shake out their arms, check the time, scan the room. Their discomfort is loud. Your silence beside it feels heavier than effort ever did. The contrast is sharp enough to notice, not sharp enough to address. This is where authority shifts. Not through force, but through repetition outlasting resistance. The mind realizes it no longer controls entry or exit. It can observe, complain, narrate, but the body has already decided. The decision was made long ago, embedded in routine. Ancient discipline aimed for this exact transfer. When training no longer requires persuasion, boredom becomes informational at best. It reports sensation, not direction. It cannot vote. It cannot veto. It sits and watches the sequence complete itself. There is a subtle physical change when this clicks. The shoulders drop slightly. Jaw unclenches. Movements feel smaller, less urgent. Not because effort has decreased, but because conflict has. Training is no longer a negotiation between parts. It is a single motion unfolding. Social reactions fade into the background. Comments, glances, curiosity, they register and pass. The body does not tighten around them. Reputation has no effect on the sequence. The routine exists independently now, like a tide that comes in regardless of observers. As the session ends, there is no internal summary. No judgment of good or bad. The body cools. Breath slows. The floor feels the same underfoot. Nothing remarkable marks the moment, and that is the mark. Boredom did not disappear. It was simply demoted. It no longer decides what happens next. And once that authority is gone, discipline stops being something you summon. It becomes something that happens. What remains after interest is gone. By now, the practice has shed everything decorative. No anticipation. No resistance. The body enters the space with the same neutrality it carries into sleep or waking. The floor is cool. The light is unchanged. Nothing signals that today is different from yesterday. Movement begins without ceremony. Muscles engage with minimal instruction. Breath finds its pace early and stays there. There is no search for depth, no attempt to feel something meaningful. The sequence unfolds because it exists, not because it promises anything. This is where many expect emptiness to feel hollow. Instead, it feels stable. The absence of interest removes pressure. There is nothing to chase, nothing to avoid. Training occupies the body the way weather occupies a day. It happens, and the body adapts. Boredom still appears as sensation. A dull ache in the legs. A slight fog behind the eyes. The mind notes the flatness, then runs out of commentary. There is nothing left to critique. The routine has become too familiar to argue with. Others react differently now. Some stop asking questions. Some quietly adjust their own timing, avoiding overlap. A few stay longer than before, matching the pace without speaking. The social field shifts, not dramatically, but enough to be felt. Stability has weight. The disciplined figure notices less. Attention no longer flares toward reaction. The body is busy maintaining rhythm. Hands move. Feet place themselves. The sequence holds together without supervision. This is not autopilot. It is installation. Ancient discipline was built for this residue. What remains when desire leaves, when novelty fades, when boredom loses its edge? They train not to feel strong, but to remain intact. Not to enjoy repetition, but to survive it without fracture. There is a physical marker when this settles. The chest feels open, not energized. The neck releases without stretching. Movements feel economical, almost indifferent. Training is no longer something being done. It is something being maintained. As the session nears its end, there is no countdown. Time passes without tracking. The body completes the final motion and stands still. Sweat cools on the skin. Breath slows. The room feels unchanged, and yet something is different. Interest did not return. Motivation did not appear. Nothing rose to replace them. And still, the practice held. This is what remains after boredom has done its worst. A routine that does not require encouragement. A body that returns without asking why. an identity that persists without reinforcement. At this point, the question is no longer how to stay consistent. It is what would be lost if this stopped, stability that does not need permission. By the end, nothing dramatic announces itself. The body finishes the final movement and stands still. Breath slows. Sweat cools on the skin. The room looks the same as when you entered. No lesson presents itself. No emotion rises to seal the moment. And yet something has settled. Discipline was never built to feel good. It was built to remain. What you trained through was not boredom, but the need to be entertained by your own effort. When that need fell away, stability had space to appear. This is the quiet inversion most people never reach. You no longer rely on interest to continue. You no longer wait for motivation to arrive. The body returns because returning is normal. Absence would feel strange. Stopping would require justification, and justification no longer matters. Ancient warriors did not ask whether they felt engaged. Zen monks did not seek stimulation in repetition. They trusted what endured after desire thinned out. What remained was not intensity, but form. Not passion, but structure. A way of moving through days without internal debate. This is discipline as identity. Not something you summon when conditions are right, but something that operates regardless of them. Boredom does not disappear. It simply loses its authority. If you've followed this far, you already know the cost. Stability isolates. It creates friction. It removes excuses you once depended on. But it also gives you something rare, a rhythm that holds even when nothing is happening. Make this final commitment public. In one sentence. No explanation. No context. State the practice you will continue even when it feels empty.